everybody, and thank you for joining us on another episode of Secure After Dark. I am your host, as always, Tanner, and I've got with me here Joe Bowersox. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Tanner. Appreciate you having me on. Appreciate the time, and really excited to just get to talk to you.
Yeah, he's a pretty very well known local name. I think the majority of people here in security have some idea who you are.
Fair enough.
So kind of, I guess, give us a little bit of your background.
I've been in technology since 2000. Started off working at GoDaddy Software, the domain registrar, back before they were selling domains.
In 2000?
Yeah, back in 2000. I graduated college out there in Arizona, went over to GoDaddy, worked there for a couple of years as a network operations specialist, and then from there moved back to Oklahoma. Worked for Redlands Community College over there in El Reno.
I worked for Redlands Community College.
Fantastic. Well, okay, so we can definitely trade some stories there at some point. Maybe not live, but so worked at Redlands for a while, worked for some other local organizations, and now have joined Jasco about 10 years ago, and now the Vice President of Technology Solutions over there. So
right on.
About 24 years in the industry, worked various different roles, mostly related to cybersecurity and infrastructure. So that's really where my wheelhouse and my passion is. And so,
right on. And we're going to talk about some incident response stuff.
Yeah.
So you've kind of had your hands in quite a bit of incident response over the years, leading them from the business side, which I have lots of questions about, and I want to ask about like psychological, philosophical things as well that nobody really talks about.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But also like kind of so I know Redlands. We got to talk about. It's interesting. What years were you there?
04 to 07.
04. Okay. Yeah. Nice. I started there in 2010.
Oh, gotcha.
So,
okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Where were you? Which department were you in? And
networking.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So were you working with like
Curtis,
Matthew and Russell?
Yeah,
and
Matthew, Curtis.
Yeah. No, they were semi like during my transition.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, great staff over there. A lot of fond memories.
Yeah.
Jack Bryant was a fantastic mentor to me over there. Troy Milligan as well. Some really good people over there. Really fondly remember my time at Redlands.
Yeah. Well, I won't bore people too much. We'll talk about it more later.
Fair enough.
So what do you do for fun?
For fun? Oh, see, this is a trap question. I knew you were going to lead into this. So I competitively do dance gaming. So Dance Dance Revolution, I played it for 24 years. Yeah. Again, like pretty much 2000 was like my watershed moment of who I'm going to become as an adult, right? Started playing Dance Dance Revolution around that time. Have evolved into playing both Pump It Up and Dance Rush Stardom alongside it. If you're local to the Oklahoma City area, you can typically see me at Quail Springs Mall playing the dance games over there.
Nice.
Have a couple of tournaments coming up. We just actually wrapped one up in April called The Big Deal.
Okay.
I've done tournament organizing for that for the past 3 years. So we're on event number 5 coming up this April in Dallas. So so really competitive dance gaming. I do amateur woodworking. We actually just built a chicken coop for my wife.
Okay.
So she got 7 chickens, right? And this is to anybody who's Oklahoman and has like some farm space, more than likely you know what I'm talking about whenever I refer to chicken math, right? So at first we were like, okay, me, my 3 daughters, my wife, we were like, okay, we're each going to pick out a chicken. We have 5 to start, right?
Yeah.
Well, one of the chickens didn't grow up the same way the other 4 did. They all kind of hit growth spurts, and this one little one was just kind of like out there on their own, and they were like, oh, we're going to peck at this one, and we're going to, bully it a little bit. So we're like, okay, we got to get some friends, right? So we went out and we went down and got 2 more chickens. One was just to get it a partner, and then the salesperson was like, here you go, have another one. So here now we are with 7. We found out that one was a rooster. Which is great because now I've got a rooster and 6 hens.
Yeah. That's
so
good.
My wife is now thinking, okay, we're going to have to build 2 chicken coops. So all that saying to just say, look, I've utilized some woodworking talents to put together 1 coop. I'm probably going to end up having to build another one now.
Okay.
So for fun, it's pretty much whatever the girls and Amber wants to do alongside my dance game.
Right on.
My dance game efforts. So that pretty much takes up the majority of my time. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same things that, most typical dads with, daughters in Gen Z will do, the gaming stuff that my kids are really into, like anime and stuff like that. So we we go to different conventions and do different things there. But my daughter is actually one of my daughters is working on archery as well. So really enjoy doing that with her. Crafting and things like that. So really, my free time revolves around the girls and sure, their different activities. So
right on. Very cool. Yeah, I did a little bit of the dance gaming back in the day.
Okay, so realistically, what we should do is a follow-up podcast where you come out to Play Springs and we play some DDR, right?
Yeah.
So
I quit whenever everything started going diagonals. Whenever it was just
that's Pump It Up. So I was referring to like the different games.
I feel like they took all the DDR games out of every arcade though.
They did, right? Yeah. Like there was kind of a little mass exodus once Konami kind of exited around the Supernova era, which is back in like 2006. They kind of exited the U.S. market, and then they just released in 2016 DDR Ace, where they came back to the U.S. market. So we're seeing a little bit of a renaissance now. There's 4 different versions that came after Ace, and we're on this 4th version, which is called DDR World, which is just new, and it's really kind of revitalizing the community a little bit.
Okay, very cool.
So it's awesome. We have some pretty big tournaments. The big deal down there, the Big Deal 3D, which is the one that we did right before the pandemic, we actually had over 250 competitors, throughout all the different games that we had there. And then we relaunched after, a delay because of the pandemic. You can't have, big events and stuff like that. Finally, this year we were able to do the Big Deal 4, and we had lower than we did at 3, but we still had almost 200 competitors across all the different games. So it's a pretty active nationwide thing, right? It's pretty active community. It's great to be a part of, and has been part of who I am for a long time, right? I actually have lost a significant amount of weight, right? I was a pretty heavy set guy. I was at 360 at my heaviest. I'm down to around 260 now. So
that's awesome.
Maintaining it really well with it. So keeps me in shape, keeps me young, keeps me healthy. So
it's better for you than playing Counter-Strike, that's for sure.
Oh, I mean, now don't get me started on Counter-Strike 1.6. We can talk about that. Didn't jump into CS:GO, but definitely have fond memories of the 1.6 days.
That was the golden era.
For sure. Absolutely.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I did want to ask about some of the incident response stuff.
So this isn't a gaming podcast?
It's unfortunately not, but honestly, it's kind of whatever I want to talk about.
Fair enough. All right. Yeah. Well, you are the leader in this regard. So
100%. People are subjected to whatever I happen to find interesting at that moment.
Fair enough. We'll talk about whatever you want to, boss.
So I wanted to ask about kind of from what I've led a lot of incident responses from a consultant side. Mm-hmm. What I haven't really done is led them from the business side. Right. I haven't been the guy who's getting that first escalation call. I'm always the guy who, once they realize there's a problem, then they call us. Mm-hmm. And then, I think I've adapted fairly well to that. But what I don't really know is kind of what's that like? That has to be like a gut wrenching kind of like your heart drops feeling whenever, you realize, oh crap, you can't, because oftentimes I guess it starts off, hey, email's not working.
Yeah.
And then it's, hey, why is email not working? Hey, I can't get into the email server. Mm-hmm. Hey, I got into the email server with VMware, but it just has this file that says README on the desktop. Mm-hmm. Like that, once you realize, like what's that like?
I mean, the incident responses that I've fortunately been a part of.
And that's an extreme, that's an extreme case. You may not have had that extreme of a case, right? Like,
now, fortunately, right, we've come across a couple of different instances, where we were able to address different situations accordingly. The big thing is the human factor.
Yeah.
Like in any sort of response, regardless of whether you're dealing with, a ransomware attack on your systems, or if you're dealing with a user who got phished, right?
Okay.
There's all sorts of different reactionary responses that you can have to that, right? But the thing that you can't let go of is the human factor. At the end of the day, these aren't just systems being impacted. They're humans, right?
Right.
They're different people, whether it's, the person who fell for a phishing, scam and was like, hey, my credentials got expanded, or my credentials got exposed, or it's the unfortunate side effect of, hey, a system is down because of, malicious attacker or whatever the case may be.
Right.
The fact of the matter is that you can't lose focus to the human aspect of it. And that goes across the board. As a technology leader, one of the key things that I have are two things that are of mine here. How can I best service my team that's handling the systems and the response and everything else around that? But also, what am I communicating to the business as a whole? Like, how are we working together to solve the issues at hand, right?
Right.
You can't let the emotion of the situation overcome the reaction that you have to bring to the organization, right? Because
Right.
in that moment, you're really seen as, hey, I am helping the organization, but there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of chaos going on with this whole thing, right? You know, start with just the end user, right? A simple end user breach.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Let's say, somebody got
Let's say
fished.
somebody got fished,
Yeah.
right? In that example, the first thing is to obviously, do your incident response plan. If you
Right.
don't have one, get one, right? Work with the wonderful individuals here at Alias to build one out for you. But the fact of the matter is that know when to engage, and work with your team. Have your team, really heavily focused on the technical aspects, but as a leader, go to that individual, talk to them, communicate with them, right? Have the open communication to clearly know, hey, we're still assessing the situation. It's
Mhm.
not like disciplinary measures and things like that aren't for us as technical leaders to take on, right? That's for
Right.
the business to decide what
Mhm.
happens after the fact. And this is where clear communications with the business are so necessary, right? There, you have to go and say, hey, if this happens, what is the response here? How do we turn this over to you, human resources department? How do we turn this over to you, leadership team? Right here, we have to remain as neutral as we possibly can
Sure.
while still assessing the situation and present facts, right? This is what happened. This is how we're going to address it, right? With the guidelines outlined in our incident response book.
Mhm.
But secondarily, how is the business reacting to that, right?
Right.
And as a leader, you have to bridge that gap, right?
Yeah.
You can't just sit here and go, hey, it's on me to solve all of this. You have to partner with the business and know what the lines of delineation are. What are you responsible for?
Sure.
I'm responsible for the technical portion of it. My team is responsible for the technical portion of it. The business has to make the decisions around, how are we doing any sort of, training, disciplinary action, things like that. Those are business level decisions. And you have to know when to step back from that so you're not encroaching on decisions that you really shouldn't be making. Now, it's a partnership, of course, right? But always factor those pieces in. What is your lane versus what the business expectations are, and where do you meet to have a good partnership? So that's
Yeah.
long-winded way of saying, like, know where to stay
And
and know what to do in the situation.
so staying in the lane. But I imagine you also don't want to come off as just the cold technology guy.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Like,
So how do you prevent people from being scared to come to you? Like when people, oh crap, I think something happened. Like that
well, and also
user
prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? So,
Sure.
like, if you're already building those relationships up front, right? If you're already working with the individuals in your organization and they know that they can come talk to you about things, and it's not like, hey, I'm going to come get my hand slapped every time I come down to, the technology team, right? You start fostering really good relationships. One of the really good things that we have at Jasco is just our culture
Mhm.
around how we treat each other individually. The best part of working there is that it's always that one team, one dream mentality,
Mhm.
right? We are here to service the organization as a whole. It is not a tribal mentality. It's how are we going to collaborate together and work together to solve the problems, right? I think everybody comes with good faith. I think that we have a culture of that, right? We continue to drive that within the organization, but that also has to come from us too, right? A lot of what we do is very complex, right? It's very complex in nature, and it's not as it's not as simple to just sit down and you can explain what you do in 30 minutes, right? You have
Right.
to go over a broad spectrum of different things. And the kicker to that is, how do you translate that, right? How do you work with the organization so they're not afraid of it, but they also are not afraid of you as individuals? They're not afraid of your team, right? How are you imparting that culture with the business? And
Mhm.
um, So again, long-winded way of saying, like, be proactive in your communications, be
Okay.
proactive in your trainings. Like, hey, if this happens to you, come talk to us, report it, right? Even if you're self-reporting, that's significantly better than just letting it lie and us finding out, down the line,
Yeah.
because now you've triggered an alert and who knows how long that's been going on. So the culture of just openness, we have an open door policy. Come talk to us anytime you want, right? So, yeah, I mean, that's the best way to do it, is be upfront and honest about it, and then also have that open door policy with the organization. Don't delay on that. Start really ramping those efforts up now, because psychologically, if I'm sitting here and I'm the attacker, and you're, like, say the roles are reversed, right? I'm the person that got fished, right? And you're the VP attack, right?
Mhm.
If I feel like I can't report to you or your team that happened, right? What am I going to do? I'm going to try to hide it.
Yes.
I'm going to try to
Yes.
shuffle it under the deck and pray that nothing happens.
And we see that happen, and we
Right.
see it happen whenever it comes in, and these later things where it might be a full-blown ransomware
Mhm.
thing,
It might.
where we then find out, oh, that person got fished,
Right.
and then at that point it's okay, did they know?
Right.
Like, if they had known, oh, that was a weird email, I'm not
Mhm.
sure about that, I guarantee you would rather answer 100 no, that wasn't a phishing email, than you would one,
Yeah.
yes, your computer is encrypted.
There's limits to it, right? There's definitely limits to it. There's ways that, like, it's like you look at some of them and you're like, okay, y'all really, like, how
Mhm.
do you not tell? But that's where education comes into effect too. One of the things that we as technologists that I've seen across the past 24 years is really, we tend to overestimate what people should see as common knowledge, right? Especially when it comes to tech. And one of the biggest concerns that I have, especially with the rise of AI and some of these other things, is people feel like there's just an immediate answer for everything,
Mhm.
when typically the answer could be a little bit more complex, right? And sometimes you can't just say, okay, you should have known this. Well, why should they have known this? Did you train them? Did you have open training sessions? Did you talk about it in your company town halls? Did you talk about it as part of your overall company strategy? Did you have the discussions internally that show what a risk it is to the organization as a whole? If you didn't, and if you're not driving that as a technological leader, what are you doing?
Right.
Because at that point,
it's on you.
it's on you. And the fact of the matter is that you have an obligation to the organization to lower risk, and lowering risk through education is the best way possible. You can't just go in and assume that everybody should know everything that you know, right?
Mhm.
We live in a different world. We're immersed in this every single day. Like an accountant is immersed in bank accounts and spreadsheets every day.
Right.
Like a business intelligence person is immersed in Power BI or Tableau, right? Those there's specific levels of expertise there that sometimes gets taken for granted. And we're sitting here thinking, well, you should have known that. Well, why should you? Question that, right? Did we do our due diligence to make sure that our user community is as well informed and as well trained as possible? And if so, okay, then you can ask that question, right? We feel like we've done that due diligence.
Mhm.
So yes, they should have known this because we covered it in training XYZ, right? But if you didn't have that and you're sitting there going, well, you should have known this, how would they have known that? They didn't
Right.
go to school for this. They didn't get the certifications for this stuff, right? So you have to continually educate. And that means also new incoming onboarding. You can't do one training and then just let it lie. You got to keep it going, right?
Yep.
So in my mind, again, it just comes down to an ounce of prevention is worth about a cure. Be proactive, not reactive, and understand the risks that you're taking on if you're not fully engaging with your cybersecurity team, or you're not at least talking about cybersecurity with your executives. So
Okay. So that's a good thing to transition to. Also, you talk about executives.
Mhm.
So kind of what's that like? What's the best thing to do there whenever, let's say you have an issue? I don't know. It's a little higher severity than a phishing. It's questionable what happened. You have to do some analysis. And let's say like you have to report that to the CEO or to whoever. Kind of
keep it factual. I mean,
Okay.
the big thing is that if you don't have the answers, don't say you do.
Mhm.
Keep it as factual as possible. Keep it focused. Keep it like, this is what happened, this is the risk, and this is what we're still assessing, right? This is, and then ultimately, this is our game plan because this is our incident response plan that we're following. And again, if you're preventative with it and you have this published document that you review on a specific cadence, whether that's quarterly, biannually, or annually, whatever it is for your business, if you're reviewing those things, right, in the proper cadence, then this should be common knowledge. But again, you have to be proactive. You have to be repetitive with some of this stuff. And it gets a little bit like, man, why are we doing this again? But you know why you're doing it from your chair. And you get those questions, why are we reviewing this again? Well, it's to keep it front of mind because it is a tremendous amount of risk. And in 2024, the risks of cybersecurity are not the risk of 2014. They're not the risk of 2004. You know, we're not talking about 2600 Magazine and Freakers, right? We're talking about legitimate state-sponsored attacks. You're talking about active risk against your organization that can cripple yourselves in a blink of an eye if you're not careful. And so, you know, as technological leaders, this has to be forefront of the mind. Sure, we want to talk about the big, sexy projects. We want to talk about the beautiful visualizations we create, or we want to talk about data integrity, or we want to talk about, you know, making sure that we're automating as much as possible. Or, you know, again, the advancements of AI. But all of that comes with cyber risk as well. And if we're not looking at that portion of it and being upfront and honest with ourselves about it, we're dead in the water. Like right there. Because again, all it takes is one bad implementation, one poorly done service account, one organization person that should have had less privileges than they do, right? Lack of zero trust. And you're sitting here scratching your head like, well, this is great. Like, you know, like we have this incident response plan. Well, why didn't we have to enact it, right? And if we didn't have that educational piece up front, and you're not communicating with your executives and not explaining to them in terms of business risk, you're failing at your messaging too, right? Because look, I absolutely love our executive side, right? I do. They truly care about cyber risk. They do, and they listen. Right? They listen. They try to understand the best that they can. Right? And so the great thing about that is that when you've established that rapport and that cadence with them, the conversations become a lot easier. But that first step has to be taken. Right? You have to establish that. You have to explain to them on their terms why they should care about this. Now it's a lot easier in 2024 than it was 10 years ago. Because 10 years ago, it wasn't on every single news channel. Whenever you turn into CNBC or Fox or whatever, you pop on and you see, okay, well, here's another breach that happened. AT&T just recently, right? You know, here's another breach that happened. Here's another breach that happened, right? So it's forefront in a lot of people's minds. So the conversation will be a little bit easier, but it's still on us to drive that conversation because it's not what they're actively watching on a day-to-day basis. It's ancillary. And so from an executive standpoint, the best thing that you can do is just have those communications early, often, right? And on a specific cadence, right? You know, we do quarterly updates, right? That works out well for our business, right? So whatever that cadence is, you determine it with your executive leadership and you provide the KPIs and the metrics accordingly. So,
that's
sorry again for the long-winded answer.
No, you're good. You're good.
Like
you're good. The updating thing is interesting. I made a LinkedIn post today about updates. There was a Cloudflare did a study and they found that there was recently a POC that was getting exploited 22 minutes after release.
Wow.
In the wild.
Wow.
So people ask, how often should you update? And I'm just like, however often you can.
Right.
There's not an often enough that you can do.
Right.
Do it as often enough as you can afford to.
Well, there's risk inherent to that as well. Because
it's
bad
very
patches,
true.
Right.
And that's why I don't like the auto patching softwares.
Sure.
Like everything needs to be vetted.
Yeah.
Because you start patching things and all of a sudden it breaks something. And maybe, everybody's seen that happen at least once.
100%.
I mean, it's one of those things where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't at this point.
Right. But again, it's weighing of risk, right? So like I think for certain systems, right, certain subsystems in an organization, everybody has kind of their tier of systems, right? You have your tier 1 systems that are really driving your order catch process and things of that nature. But then you have your tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5. They start to spin back down. You know, this is where, you know, systematically, you can start making a game plan around the autos to where the autos can go to your dev test systems, right? Or,
Right.
whatever works for your organization. Sometimes it's not dev test. Sometimes it's just smaller servers that you don't really care if you reboot in the middle of the day. They provide one function. It provides one function to one team or one team member, right? But with updates, you're absolutely right. Because the thing that will expose you from a systemic standpoint, now we'll put away the social side for a second, right? And we'll talk
Although that's
systems.
the majority.
Although that's the majority of it, right?
Yeah.
The majority of your systems are going to be compromised because you got in through the weakest link, which is always going to be the human factor.
Yep.
Right. But if you have systems that are left unpatched in the wild, right, and exploits are mature enough to have easily available tools on the dark web and things of that nature, I mean, sure, like that's on you, right? You got to make sure that like the cadence is there. 0 days, especially, right? It's like, hey, this is a CVE 10. We got to take immediate action on this, right? And we got to do what is right for the organization. You get it as soon as possible. You get the patching from Microsoft or whoever, right? And you get it applied accordingly. Just recently, the OpenSSH vulnerability, right? There wasn't any known exploits for it,
right?
Immediately, right? Still over a 9 on the CVE.
Yeah.
Right?
There wasn't any known POCs that were working.
Right.
So they knew the exploit was possible and they released that. So at that point, there was a patch, but yes, there's no known POCs.
Right.
It doesn't mean there won't be tomorrow.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the tricky part, is that some of these do have known POCs. Right. Which spikes it up in value. And that's where you're like, okay, we got to take immediate action on this. But even the ones that are of the higher severity that aren't like actively done in the wild, doesn't mean that tomorrow there's not a new release. There is active engagement, especially once it starts to go live and go public, that hey, this version of OpenSSH is vulnerable. Like, okay, that's a great attack vector. Let's go try to exploit that before everybody gets their systems patched.
Absolutely.
It's almost like an arms race of like, can you get the patch in before you get the exploit happen, right? So systemically, I mean, that's the key of like, patching has been one of the more, I don't want to say difficult things for us in technology, over the past quarter century that have been involved in these sort of discussions. It's really going to be dependent on what your business risk is, right? Because if I have no forward-facing systems to the internet, right, am I more exposed than somebody who has, a reverse proxy sitting out there? Like it's like, where's the balance? And as a business, you have to make that decision.
We talk about attack surface a lot too, and that's where that comes into play.
Right.
I think that one of the most important things you can do, education is actually up there as well, but I think attack surface reduction and actually knowing what your attack surface
100% agree.
is so important. Because like the majority of the times that I get in on an external specifically, most externals, to be honest, I don't get in without social engineering.
Right.
And we usually separate that out in our scoping. And the majority of the time, we don't actually get in on externals because if we could, chances are somebody else has.
Right.
So the majority of the time it's good, but whenever we do, it's almost always, oh yeah, that's just our test system that our developer uses, and he just forgot about it.
Yeah,
it's still in your domain.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't matter that you don't think it's important. It has admin credentials cached, and it's on your domain.
Right.
Like
exactly. Like I mean, you have to look at it from that wide net that you're casting whenever you do a recon assignment, right? Like if again, I'm putting myself in your shoes, for example, right? And I'm doing an assessment, I'm doing a pen test. I'm going to cast that net as wide and as far as possible because here's the thing. I would rather cast it too wide and not catch anything than cast it too small and miss something. And now I'm giving leaders like myself, you're telling me, hey, you're pretty clear.
Yeah.
And then we have misses, right, in different areas. So really, that's why, again, thank you to our sponsor, Alias Cybersecurity, for today's events. They cast a wide net.
It's more plugging than I've ever done in a podcast.
Hey, you were kind enough to invite me over to talk, right? So, but at the end of the day, you're absolutely right. How do we make sure that attack vector, right, is shrunk? Because the smaller the target, the smaller the window of opportunity for the attackers. Right. I mentioned archery earlier with my daughter really going in like, shout out to her. She's on her 4th pin, which is awesome. Like
Nice.
she's going down she's really good. I'm proud of her. The targeting, right? You go from 60 centimeters to 40,
Mhm.
right? Which one's easier to hit?
Obviously, the bigger.
Obviously the bigger target, right?
Mhm.
So like right there, if you have this gigantic ball of targeting exposed to the internet, exposed as a footprint, you have all of these different connectors going out there to different third-party SaaS services and everything else that are unmonitored, unmaintained, unwatered, so to speak, right? We're not taking care of them and making sure that we're doing, everything in our power to ensure that, okay, that's linked there and that's linked there. And we have that documented and everything's covered, right? The sprawl of it all becomes very, very quickly unmanageable. Well, when the unmanageable sprawl hits, well, your target just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's far easier to shoot a bullseye on it, right? It's far easier to hit on target, hit that paper, because your target venue is so much bigger than what it should be to facilitate the business. And I think that that's something that doesn't get really talked about a lot as well, right? How much technical debt do you carry? Because if you're carrying a lot of technical debt, right, that just increases your target portfolio, because now you have all of these subsystems and these legacy things that are either poorly documented or not documented, or just out there and they just have been and nobody's really ever questioned it.
Yeah.
Well, now you're sitting here going like, well, that's running Windows 7.
Yeah. Windows CE.
I'm not going to not name organizations, but I used to work for an organization that had Windows NT4 in 2011.
Yeah.
And you're sitting here going like, can we replace this thing? Like, can we do anything to replace this? And the software is custom built software that would only run NT4. So what do you have to do?
All the time.
So what do you have to do? You have to air gap it.
Mhm.
There's no way that you can allow that on your network and claim that you're secure, right? Now that's systemic, right? It's not social, but yeah, I mean, we had a point where it's like, no, this has to stay offline. You can't integrate this in.
Yeah.
And the business had to make that decision, right? Now, the other thing about leaders, right, in the technological space, we have to have partnerships. We can't make decisions unilaterally or in a vacuum or anything like that. You have to express the risk and let the business decide like what is acceptable risk, right?
Right.
So in that case, I didn't just say, take it offline, boys. Like we have to kill it now, right? Or whatever. This is a massive risk to the organization. And it is my highest advisement to take this thing and air gap it from the rest of the network. You can still run, test data through it or whatever the case may be. You can extract data from it, move it, however you need to do there. But let's do it in a secure way. Let's do it in a process-driven way, not something that's just out there and is going to cause us harm in the future, because now they're using this as a jump-off point to get to other locations.
Right.
So
yeah, no, you're 100% right. We see that a lot in industrial control systems and SCADA stuff.
Oh yeah, 100%.
We see it a ton where it's not looked at through the same lens as information technology is.
No,
it's a totally separate thing. It's a different group of people that operate it.
Mhm.
Where it's, you have somebody who's more of a machine operator
Right.
or something like that, or engineer, and they come up through that, and then they end up inheriting this system because they work their way up.
Sure.
And yeah, the system works. Why are you going to mess with it?
Well, that's the whole point. That's the whole system, or the whole human factor to it,
Mhm.
right? Because here's the thing: at the end of the day, people are not against you; they're for themselves.
Sure.
And at the end of the day, what they're going to do is what's right for their job, not what's right for your job, right? Just like you're going to do what's right for your job before you do what's right for their job.
Yeah.
You have to keep that into consideration whenever you're talking. But just the softest of soft skills, you can go in and say, hey, look, we have a problem with the way that this is being done right now, because this is an inherently legacy system that I know the business is reliant on. How can we partner together to find the best path forward to where it's secure, modern, and upkept, so we don't run into this situation again? You have to breach that conversation. And a lot of times, especially in this industry, we have difficulty just going back to the basics of social interaction, right? Where I'm listening to you. Yes, I want something out of this. I want a secure system. I want to get this off my network. I don't want to have this as a massive risk point that I'm having to put on every PowerPoint that I bring to an executive, right?
Yeah.
I don't want that.
Right.
I don't want this heat. I don't want this heat for you. I don't want this heat for the organization. What I want is for us to partner together to find a solution to it, right? Let's work together. That's partially why my team's name isn't IT, it's Technology Solutions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because specifically, we want to drive solutions for the organization. That's why we're there. Right. Because again, if the business isn't succeeding, we don't have jobs, right? Like if you bear it down to brass tacks, right? We're all there to do a job, and ours is to lower the risk while keeping the systems online, safe, and secure. So it's very simple.
Yeah.
So what do you have to do? You have to listen to the business people. You have to understand where they're coming from their perspective, express your opinions and your concerns in a very professional manner, and just go back to the basics of human interaction. How can we partner together to figure this out? Now, if there's frustrations, you escalate accordingly. Like you just treat it like you would any other business conflict. But the key point, and if I can give any piece of advice, upcoming leaders in technology, never make it personal. It's never personal. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
Like we're all here to do a job. We're all here to work together as a team. And that's why I love our culture, right? Because it's driven by that one team mentality. We're all succeeding together, right? And that's the mentality you have to go in whenever you're having these conversations, the tougher conversations around business and around risks to the business. Because the last thing they want is to have their system that they're using go offline, right? Now, in the grand scheme of things, that may be a smaller jump off point to, oh, it's offline because there's a bigger picture here and they use that as the exploit, or the exploit jump off point. But they don't want that to happen either because now they're at risk, right? So you have to express it to them, and it doesn't matter whether, you're working with a frontline worker, in a distribution center, or, testing equipment in an engineering lab, or an executive. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, your communication needs to be very, very similar. This is a risk. How can we work together to figure out how to mitigate that risk? Right. So
have education, and then don't be the typical IT department that people don't want to talk to because they're going to get some smart ass answer.
I try so hard to avoid the typical IT thing. Like it's weird because I've worked with a lot of people that would be that typical IT person.
It's a stereotype.
It's a stereotype for a reason. Absolutely. And it's weird because a lot of times, my managers, I will get the feedback of, you guys are like other typical IT people, right? Which is good. Like that's what I like to hear because do you ever remember the old Wendy's commercial where they had like the guy pushing the cart around, and like they take a bite of the sandwich and they go off to a field somewhere and he's still pushing the cart around? Like it's just a stereotypical, it's a guy that looks like Jimmy O Yang from Silicon Valley.
Okay.
Right. He's pushing this. It is old, probably before your time. I am getting old. Like this is where, but the whole thing is that like, that's how a lot of people see IT. Absolutely. It's like this obstinate, like, just I'm here because I'm smarter than you or whatever. No, it's none of that. Like that's not what I try to impart as part of my team leadership. It's really what are we doing to help the organization, right? They're coming to us with problems. And again, we're here to help them find solutions. Now the solution may not be what they want to hear. Don't get me wrong. Like there's been plenty of times where I've had conversations. I'm like, we can't do that.
Right.
Like, and here's why. Yeah. Right? We have roadblocks of our own that we have to overcome.
You can't use AOL email. It won't work with your corporate email.
Right. Stop using your personal accounts. So, like I've had that happen in the past too, luckily so much here. But this is where it's like one of those things where now, you just have that continual education, but not being, what's the word I'm looking for? Like where I'm talking down to you. Right.
Yeah. Condescending.
Like, hey, I want you to understand from my perspective.
Yeah.
That's something I say a lot is let me tell you from my perspective how I'm understanding this, right? This is the risk to me. This is the risk to the organization. And this is the risk, frankly, to you, right? This is why I think you should care about it. And then give them a chance to rebuttal, give them a chance to talk back and listen to what they're saying.
It might be a good reason.
It might be a really good reason.
It might be. That's one of those things where, okay, this system's important. Let's air gap it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Like you can find compromise. You can find different ways of providing solutions. Now, are you going to protect against everything? No, that NT4 box is probably, not the thing we want to keep relying our business processes on as well. Because it's not just a security failure concern. Now it's can I get parts for this? Like, can I get like if this dies, do I have an NT4? Like, do I have a clone of this somewhere? Like, if this hard drive dies, am I, And so, legacy tech in general isn't just a cyber risk concern; it's a business continuity risk concern.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And
those two are more closely related. Being realized.
Exactly, and that's really where I'm like, okay, it's so important, and we have a lot of tough discussions around like which systems do we need to update, which systems have that life cycle of 3 to 5 years versus 8 to 10, right? And it's like I always look at like networking equipment as having a longer life cycle typically than what a traditional desktop, laptop, whatever the case would be. And that's because again, you can pay for extended maintenance, you can get the the lifetime warranties, you can get replacements, you can get free upgrades, whatever the case may be, whenever you first put in that infrastructure to future proof yourself, right? Laptops, desktops, printer, stuff like that, unless we're talking about the old HP LaserJets, in which case those things will last forever, right? Right, old LJ4s.
Can't kill them.
Right, can't kill them. Like I'm certain that half of the U.S. economy runs off of LaserJet 4s at some point in time. But the fact of the matter is that going back to what we were initially talking about is that the risk associated with it, whether it's business continuity or cyber risk, they both play a part in keeping these systems up to date, but also keeping a good rapport with the business, because nobody's going to listen to you if you're a jerk. Nobody's going to take you seriously. They're going to be like, oh God, this guy's in this meeting again. I don't want to talk to this guy. He's just going to tell me no. He's just going to say he's just going to be a roadblock. And then what happens?
They'll find a way to work around you.
Whoop, right around you. They'll walk right around you. And it's not because, again, it's not because they're against you. It's because they're for themselves. Well, okay, then work with them, right? Don't be working against the grain. There's no point. I talked about the woodworking stuff, right? Don't stand against it, right? Go with it. Go with it. It makes it so much easier, and it makes it so much better in the end. You get a better polished product because you're working with the business. The other piece to that, right? And I keep getting these other pieces, so I apologize.
Many pieces to the puzzle.
There's a lot of pieces to the puzzle, and this is what you have to digest, right? The other piece to that puzzle really comes down to what the business needs are versus what you perceive the business needs to be.
Okay.
Right? So I may think that something is the most important thing in the world, especially when it comes to cyber risk, right? You take that you take that and you're like, okay, this is my passion. This is what I'm here to do. This is what I'm here to prevent, like any sort of issues, right? And you run to those things. But then what happens? You get turned sideways because are you in alignment with what the business needs are as well? Are you still facilitating what the business needs are? Are you still able to go out and say, okay, I've accomplished the goals from a strategic perspective for the business? And if the answer is no, then guess what? Have you really done what you're here to do as an organizational leader? No, because now, you protected us from all the risks in the world, but did you move us forward as well? And there's a balancing act there, right? And that's why you establish partnerships with the business. You understand where their pain points are, where they're frustrating, where there's new avenues of revenue gain opportunities, right? What are we looking at from that perspective to really amplify ourselves as a business? And it can't just be all about risk. I always talk to my team about there has to be a balance between security and convenience. You can't make everything so secure that people can't do their jobs.
I always say it's a sliding scale.
It is a sliding scale.
The most secure device is locked up in Fort Knox or at the bottom of the ocean somewhere.
Right.
The most usable device is no authentication, just walk up and use it.
Right.
Have to be somewhere between.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that it's just that balancing act, but it all comes down to what I've been talking about pretty much the entire time.
Don't stop. I'm getting a beer.
No, by all means, go grab it. But that's really where the biggest piece of the puzzle is that disconnect with the business. If you're in there working with the business, you've got good partnerships, good rapport, it's so much easier for everybody involved, right?
Absolutely.
And it's so much better for everybody involved because everybody's in alignment, right?
Yeah.
There's no gotchas. There's no like, towers over here and siloed information. And we made this decision without like any sort of investment or discussions with business units that are impacted, right?
Yep.